Okay, taking a look at our hazardous weather graphic. We've got winter storm watches out for snow and heavy snow, or heavy snow and blowing snow here for the St. Lawrence Island area, Yukon Delta, lower and mid-Yukon River Valley areas up in toward Galena, the Seward Peninsula, as you can see, noaa Valley, and all of the northwest coast, including Kotzebue and Kivalina, right up to Point Hope and Cape Lisburne. Now, that's going to go into effect later tonight here for the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island area, and then toward morning and through the day tomorrow here for the remainder of the shaded areas. And satellite imagery showing weak system coming across south central Alaska, most of the snow banking up along the western Alaska range, but an area of snow developing from about the Talkeetnas down through the Mananuska Valley and in toward the Kenai Peninsula, western Prince William Sound, but pretty light. And this will continue to move on through some areas of light snow to the north there, up into the eastern interior, across Fairbanks and into the Yukon Flats, and then some more clouds and moisture out here to the northwest. And this area this front kind of trailing out there to the west, and then big storm, big area of clouds there associated with an intense storm over Kamchatka Peninsula, low center there, bringing a lot of warm air with a southerly flow, winds gusting to 60, 65 miles an hour over the western Aleutians this afternoon. Temperatures approaching 40, so rain falling out there with that warmer air condition. Mid and high level clouds spilling into the central Aleutians, and rolling this through again, you'll see taking a look at the southeast coast, not too bad. There was some shower activity, scattered showers, but also some areas of clearing there over the southeast coast today. And some more of that clearing here showing up off the coast there. Otherwise, this band will continue to weaken as it pulls off to the east. We'll see on the chart right through here, kind of two bands here. One, as I mentioned, hung up along the western Alaska range, extending down in toward Bristol Bay. Another band developing over the Kenai Peninsula along the Chugach Mountains, on up into the Talkeetnas, Mananuska Valley. Areas of light snow here either side of this front, extending all the way to the western Arctic coast. Point Lay was down to a half mile in snow at one point this afternoon. And then this week, trailing front, some light snow up along the Yukon Delta coast this afternoon, Nunivak Island. Rain reported at St. Paul Island, associated with a warm front here, just moving to the north there. And then out to the west, much tighter pressure gradient associated with this low, just partially on the chart there. And that bringing those 60 to 70 mile an hour wind gusts to the western Aleutians with a pretty solid area of rain with that. Otherwise, the northern Bering Sea looking at light winds today and under high pressure, as well as the eastern North Gulf Coast. A lot of clearing today. Kodiak Island up into Prince William Sound, even some clearing in Cook Inlet into the afternoon here, and areas of the eastern interior and the Arctic coast. North Slope seeing some pretty good clearing as well, but down into the snow on the west side. For tonight, that system really washes out. A weak low here. Gulf of Alaska really not much of a factor, but areas of light snow over the Copper River Basin. Snow ending from west to east here tonight as high pressure builds into the central interior. It'll be clear, and look for colder temperatures tonight over south central Alaska, Susitna Valley areas. Dry for Kodiak Island, light winds there. And then some light snow with this warm front spreading in later tonight into Bristol Bay, but a little bit heavier out toward the Yukon Delta coast with increasing south winds. Wind, snow, blowing snow, developing, coming into the St. Lawrence Island area, spreading into the Bering Strait. Gusty winds here over the Aleutians, gale force winds, minimum gales here, the strongest winds with the low center pulling up into the Russian Far East. They're going to be up here over the western Bering Sea and northwest Bering Sea. Otherwise, maybe a few skiffs of snow, that weak trough coming over the top of that high, clipping the central Arctic coast. And the Panhandle still has a risk of some showers with partly to mostly cloudy skies. Then that low kind of drops on down to the southeast tomorrow and stays off the coast. That's going to keep it a little unsettled for the southeast coast there, but not too bad. Clear skies, sunshine here developing midday through the afternoon, maybe even in the morning hours here for much of the central and eastern interior of the state, all the way up to the eastern Arctic coastal areas. Kodiak Island, light winds. Increasing clouds, Bristol Bay, but winds will be light and conditions dry. Some light rain spreading into the eastern Aleutians. Periods of rain, gusty winds for the Pribilofs. Periods of snow and blowing snow into the Yukon Delta, St. Lawrence Island. And here where all the lines are, look for a widespread area of blowing snow extending all the way up to the western Arctic coast. And then colder air coming in behind the cold front, so rain changes to snow showers for the western Aleutians. And then for the day on Sunday, that front really weakens as it pulls eastward here. Just some areas of light rain here over the eastern Bering Sea down to the eastern Aleutians, spreading into the Alaska Peninsula. May see some winds gusting up to 30 miles an hour in the normally windier areas, such as Cold Bay. Otherwise, snow and areas of blowing snow here over the western interior, but the winds coming down with the whole system weakening, that low center pulling off up into the Arctic there. So still be pretty windy with a lot of blowing snow and snow conditions here for the western Arctic coast, and could get pretty windy here in toward the Brooks Range, northern Koyukuk Valley with chances of snow. But that cutting off here, right along the western Alaska Range and the Copper River Basin should be mostly sunny through the day, as well as the North Gulf Coast and the Panhandle. Looks like nothing but clear skies there on Sunday. Low temperatures down that way for tonight in the lower to mid-30s there, otherwise upper 20s for the North Gulf Coast. 0 to 5, Susitna Valley in the mid-teens for the Kenai Peninsula, lower 30s Kodiak Island, right around 0, Copper River Basin, 5 below to 5 above for the Kuskokwim Valley, and near 20 for Bristol Bay, freezing for Kodiak. And then the highs tomorrow, lower 40s Kodiak Island, mid-30s to lower 40s there for Bristol Bay, 41 at King Salmon, and Naknek in those areas. 30s, lower to mid-30s, a little cooler here in the south central Alaska area, staying below freezing. Matanuska, Susitna Valley, mid-20s for the Copper River Basin, in the 40s for the southeast coast. And the lows in the 20s, lower 30s for Sunday morning, low below 0 in the Kuskokwim Valley, in the Copper River Basin. Lower 20s in the Kuskokwim Valley, otherwise 5 to 15 south central Alaska, followed by highs mid-30s in here south central Alaska, upper 30s west of the Alaska Range, 41 for King Salmon, in the 40s for the Panhandle. Lows 10 to 20 below here for the northern interior, central interior areas, followed by highs, everybody above 0 now, and warming temperatures coming into St. Lawrence Island, highs in the mid-30s, and reaches that warm, you'll kill the blowing snow there. And for the lows the following morning, below 0 in the east, warmer in the west in the 20s, and as you can see, highs well into the 30s here in the western interior areas, even the Arctic coast pushing up toward 30, and out to the southwest, around 20 for the lows tonight in the coast, lower 30s for the Pribilofs, otherwise in the 30s here for the remainder of the Aleutians. Highs tomorrow, lower 40s for the central Aleutians, near 40 for the Alaska Peninsula, upper 30s for the Pribilofs, and then the lows Sunday morning, lower 30s, staying above freezing, even Bethel and Cape Romanzoff, those areas. 29 for the Pribilofs, 30 to 35 for the Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula, followed by highs in the lower 40s just about everywhere except the Pribilofs and Shimia and the southwest coast, mid to upper 30s there.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Today we're going to be talking about your aviation forecast. I'm meteorologist Emily. Let's first look at your flying weather for Saturday morning. As you can see, we have widespread IFR conditions due to that low pressure system that is moving out of the North Pacific and up northwards into the Bering Sea. You can see widespread low-level clouds and ceilings all along the western coast of Alaska. As we move to your east, you can see we have widespread IFR conditions in your morning hours in the Juneau and Panhandle area due to that low pressure system as it continues to weaken and move to the south. For your Saturday afternoon, again, the big story is that low pressure system moving upwards throughout the Bering Sea and the widespread low visibilities and low ceilings across that area. Again, we're going to still see a few areas of the Panhandle with some lingering low-level clouds that are just going to hang on throughout much of the Saturday afternoon as well. As we move into your Sunday morning, your big story again is that low pressure system and its associated front moving eastward and inland and bringing more widespread low visibilities and ceilings across much of western Alaska and the Alaska Peninsula. Meanwhile, conditions are going to be improving across your panhandle. By Sunday afternoon, your low pressure system again is going to continue, and its front are going to continue to move inland, bringing widespread IFR and MVFR conditions across much of mainland Alaska. Let's look at your passes. So we have Anaktuvuk Pass with MVFR conditions in the morning, improving to VFR in the afternoon on Saturday. Adigan Pass, again, we're going to start with MVFR conditions and improve to VFR by the afternoon hours. Lake Clark and Merrill passes are going to be remaining in MVFR conditions throughout much of your Saturday. Rainy Pass is going to start with MVFR conditions but improve towards the afternoon hours. Windy as well is going to start out at MVFR but improve to VFR by the afternoon. Isabel Pass is going to start at MVFR, but again, conditions will improve by the afternoon towards VFR. Mentasta, same story. Start with MVFR, improve to VFR towards the afternoon. Tahina Pass is going to have great flying conditions all day. Same with Portage, as although systems continue to move out of the area, great flying weather. Chilkoot and White, meanwhile, the panhandle is going to hold on to some of those clouds throughout the day on Saturday. Let's look at your freezing levels. We can see, again, this powerful system pushing warm air up into the Bering Sea. And so we can see that our freezing levels are very far north in parts of that part of Alaska. But as we move into the Gulf of Alaska, again, that remains south of the mainland. So again, we see freezing levels up to about 6,000 feet in portions of the Alaska area. So some warm air is moving northward. For your icing, again, our greatest concern is for considerable moderate, again, associated with that very powerful low pressure system and its associated front. So again, that's our greatest concern. But again, we could see isolated moderate across much of the Bering too with that system. And your jet stream. This is quite an impressive jet stream aloft. We're looking at 145 knots over some parts of the Bering. Meanwhile, on the other side of the system, we're seeing still some winds up to 115 just above Prince William Sound, 125. As we go for your 9,000 feet, again, we're seeing up to 70 knots in portions of the Gulf of Alaska and 55 knots over Prince William Sound. As we go into the Bering with our really potent system, 85 knots at 9,000 feet. Finally, when we get to 3,000 feet, not that far above the surface, we are still looking at 75 knots in the Chukchi and the Bering Strait and 65 across parts of the northern Bering. So a strong jet certainly associated with that system. As we move out to your east, we're seeing about 40 knots into the Gulf of Alaska. So some gusty winds, but certainly not nearly as potent as what we are seeing out west in the Bering on your Saturday. For your turbulence, again, the best story so far, we have isolated to severe way up in the Chukchi Sea. So certainly some concerns for flying with that powerful system. But again, consider moderate all along the coast and across the Aleutian Islands and the Alaska Peninsula, and even some considerable moderate associated with some outflow winds that we saw in the previous slide. So we are definitely going to be having turbulent conditions.
Welcome to this edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Carrie Haisley, Chief of the Emergency Services and Multimedia Branch for the National Weather Service in Anchorage. With me today, I have Dr. Doug Wesley, a physical scientist for the National Weather Service Alaska Region Headquarters. Doug, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, Carrie. Hello.
Hello. So you're here to talk to us a little bit about something called CocoRAS, which is the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. And I understand that CocoRAS is a network of volunteers who take weather observations. Can you tell us a little bit more about what CocoRAS is?
Yes, it began in the lower 48, 20 some years ago, and it's expanded during those 2 decades. They're getting something like 10 to 15,000 rainfall reports per day from the lower 48.
Wow, that's a lot of different reports. So how many reports do we get in Alaska right now?
Well, it varies. Maybe 10 to 25. But if you consider the large areas we're talking about, we have a lot of gaps to fill. Any observation is better than no observation, but there are large areas in Alaska. Alaska covers 3 million square miles. There's a lot of data gaps in that space, so we'd like to enhance it.
Sure. So tell us then a bit about why these observations are so important to Alaska and why we need to expand the number of them that we're getting.
Yes, Alaska, as you know, has large areas with a lot of complex terrain, and there are no weather observing stations or radar. So CoCoRaHS can help fill the data gaps, so you can at least get some idea of what's actually falling from the sky at those locations. CoCoRaHS increases the amount of timely weather observations available to meteorologists and other decision makers, especially in hazardous type of weather, both rain and snow and the occasional hailstorm that we get up here. CoCoRaHS observations can help forecasters identify long-term precipitation and snowfall trends in a climate sense. And just overall, they increase the amount of timely weather observations available to the public.
So then let's talk a little bit about each of the different types of observations. So it's the rain, hail, and snow network. So let's start by talking a little bit about rain observations, and tell us a little bit about how you take those and how long it takes a volunteer to get a rain observation.
Okay, this is a 4-inch gauge, just the basic gauge, which you use for both rain and snowfall. But the rain observations are pretty quick. It's a matter of 2 to 3 minutes that each volunteer goes out and takes a reading, and then they enter these on the computer, and they're immediately available for observation on the computer and on the maps, so that you can see your report. In the wintertime, it's a little bit more complicated. We require the observers to measure not only the snow accumulation, but also liquid equivalent. So they've got to melt the snowfall. This involves 2 of these gauges and a snowboard. And it's maybe a 10-minute observation per day during the winter. But the snowfall is so variable that even across town and in especially the remote areas, it's crucial that we increase this number of snow observations in the network.
Right. I understand that we can only take observations in places where we have weather service offices, and so we rely on all of these volunteers to help us fill gaps. And it's also interesting to know how snowfall varies across large spaces or even small cities. So I noticed here in Anchorage, for example, we can have a vastly different amount of snow on the east side of town and the west side of town. And so it seems like these observations would help us to better understand what's going on in places besides just where the office is.
That's correct. In any given snowfall, there are typically large variances, as you know, and we rely on reports from the public and from National Weather Service cooperative spotters to map out the snowfall that occurs so that we can predict it better in the future.
Sure. So we talked about rain observations and we talked about snow observations, and you said for each of those, if it's rain, it only takes a couple minutes, and then it can take about 10 minutes if it's snow. Hail was the other one that we didn't talk about yet. Tell us just a little bit about the hail observations that CoCoRaHS observers take.
Yeah, the CoCoRaHS network, it has a hail pad, and it's just a simple block of styrofoam covered with aluminum foil, and you can approximate the size of hail by measuring the dent that the hail causes on the pad, and this can give us an estimate of hail size. We don't get hail very often in Alaska, but I've seen it 2 or 3 times in my 5 years in Anchorage, and some of it up to a ½ inch, and I'm sure there's been larger hail up in the interior at times.
So let's talk a little bit about how these rain, hail, and snow observations can help forecasters. So we have people who forecast the weather, and we also have people who work on the hydrology side, and I can see that maybe CoCoRaHS will be beneficial to both of them. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, it's beneficial to the hydrologic forecaster who's concerned about flooding, and rainfall comprises one of the causes of a flood, or it can exacerbate high water conditions. So the more the hydrologist has to look at in terms of data from recent rainfall, the more information they have to work with when they're generating a forecast. The weather forecasters in the wintertime at the Weather Service office can use these observations also to help with past case studies, to verify model data, and to get a handle on what's actually happening out the window. And that's important in the forecast process.
Yeah, it seems like you can never have too much information when you're issuing a forecast. So it only takes a few minutes most of the time to take these observations. So let's say I'm interested in becoming a volunteer for CoCoRaHS. How do I get involved?
Yeah, the website is very useful, cocorahs.org, and it has a number of video-based training tutorials that take you right on from measuring rainfall to a video tutorial on measuring snowfall. It has the maps available in real time, and you can go back and look at that old data too through those maps. And so it's a very useful, comprehensive website.
Very interesting. And anybody can get involved, right? You don't have to be a meteorologist.
That's right. And, we love to have 24, once a day reports throughout the year, but if you can't, then so be it. And we have observers, some observers are out of town for periods of time, or maybe they can only report, a week or two of precipitation, but it's still useful. It's still data that we look at. So the more the better, but you can get involved even if you aren't at a location 24/7.
Doug, I really appreciate you coming on to our program today to talk about CoCoRaHS. Hopefully we can have you back in the studio at some point so we can talk more about it and then talk more about the different types of observations and the tools that observers use.
That would be great, yeah.
So thank you for your time, and thank you so much for joining this edition of Alaska Weather Facts.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Coastal water forecast here for the South Coast. Central and South Coast, west winds 10 to 15 knots. Seas around 7 to 8 feet. Variable winds 10 to 15 knots on the North Coast. And for Stevens Passage and Lynn Canal, pretty good wind-wise tomorrow. South at 10 knots, seas only 2 feet, and west at 10 for Clarence Strait with 2-foot seas. Outlook for Sunday, north to northeast winds here for the Central and South Coast at 20 knots, seas at about 6 feet. East winds 10 to 15 knots for the North Coast. Lynn Canal, north winds 20 knots, and northwest at 15 for Stevens Passage. Clarence Strait, light northwest breeze at 10. Prince William Sound, gale warnings tomorrow. North winds 40 knots, seas 9 feet, and gale warnings for the eastern and all of the North Gulf Coast. It will be under the influence of a gale warning for the Saturday time frame. North winds 35 knots, gusts 45 knots. Otherwise, Barren Islands, northwest at 25, Kamishak Bay, north at 25, Cook Inlet, north to northeast winds 10 to 20 knots with 2 to 6 foot seas. And for Sunday, pretty nice here for Cook Inlet, light northeast breeze at 10 knots. Light variable winds here for the most of the North Gulf Coast, Barren Islands, light variable winds at 10 knots, seas 3 feet. Southeast winds at 15 knots for Kamishak Bay. And those north winds in Prince William Sound come down from the 40-knot values of Saturday to just 10 knots on Sunday, with seas subsiding to 2 feet. And for Kodiak Island, west-northwest wind 15 knots for the day Saturday. South 15 to 20 knots here, or actually 15 to 30 knots. 20 to 30 knots, a little bit better there for the Alaska Peninsula. And then Bristol Bay looking at a south wind at 10 knots. For Sunday, Alaska Peninsula, small craft advisories, south winds 25 to as high as 30 knots. And Bristol Bay, south winds at 20 knots. Kodiak Island, southwest winds 20 knots, 4 to 5 foot seas. Eastern Aleutian, south winds, so actually central and eastern Aleutian, south winds 30 to maybe 35 knots. And for the western Aleutians, south-southwest winds 30 to 35 knots. For Sunday, west winds 25 to 30 knots for the western Aleutians, central Aleutians, west 20 to 25 knots. And then for the Fox Islands, west-southwest winds at 30 knots with seas 7 to 12 feet. For the southwest coast tomorrow, south winds 30 to 35 knots. And gale force winds for the Pribilof, St. Paul, St. George, St. Matthew Island, south at 40 knots, seas around 16 feet for the Pribilof, up to 23 feet for St. Matthew Island. St. Lawrence Island, south winds 35 knots, and southeast at 30 knots for Norton Sound. For Sunday, lighter winds, south 20 knots here, Yukon Delta Coast, St. Lawrence Island. Still a brisk wind advisory, though, for Sunday in Norton Sound. Southwest 30-knot winds, 18-foot seas, St. Matthew Island, west 25 for the Pribilofs, and the Kuskokwim Delta Coast, southwest at 30. And then up along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast for tomorrow, southwest winds at 15 knots. Central coast looking at a brisk wind advisory for southwesterlies at 25 knots. Western Arctic coast, southeast at 25 knots, and then high-end gales here from Cape Beaufort all the way down to Wales, southeast winds at 45 knots. And for Sunday, those winds ease up a little bit, become a little more southerly. South 30 knots there from Wales up to Cape Beaufort, south 30 knots for the western Arctic coast, south 25 knots there for the central coast, and south to southeast breeze at about 15 to 20 knots for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. For tonight, high pressure building into the interior, some light snow slowly moving off to the east, but kind of lingering here over the eastern interior down in the eastern Copper River Basin, clearing out south central Alaska with light wind conditions, and snow moving in here with this warm front, dragging into lightest amounts will be in Bristol Bay. It'll be heavier as you move northwest. Snow and blowing snow for the Yukon Delta coast with winter storm watch kicking into effect. A little bit of light snow skirting the central Arctic coast. Some showers continue for the Panhandle. Rain, gusty winds in the Aleutians. For tomorrow, snow and blowing snow, winter weather or heavy snow and blizzard watches out. Winter storm watches out for the Yukon Delta coast, St. Lawrence Island, Seward Peninsula, all the way up into the northwest part of the state for snow and blowing snow there. High pressure, pretty nice conditions, central eastern interior. Then on Sunday, snow tries to jump the Alaska Range, but probably won't make it. Definitely pushing into the central interior, but improving out along the west coast. Thanks for joining us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.